Gentlemen, there are 3 symptoms that walk into my office every single week. 3 symptoms that men have been living with for months, sometimes years, before they finally decide to mention them to a doctor. And here's what bothers me most. Not one of these men ignored them because they weren't concerned. They ignored them because someone, a friend, an article, a well-meaning family member, told them it was just part of getting older, that it was normal, that there was nothing to be done. That is one of the most dangerous pieces of misinformation I encounter in clinical practice. I'm Dr. Emily Carter, a board-certified urologist with over 12 years in clinical practice. I've spent a lot of that time correcting the misinformation men over 60 receive about early urological and hormonal symptoms. Today, I want to give you what the clinical evidence actually says, not what the internet says, not what a friend told you, but what the research shows. Because these 3 symptoms are not just inconveniences. They are your body's earliest warning signals. And the clinical data is unambiguous. The men who act on them early have dramatically better outcomes than the men who wait. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me what you've heard about these kinds of symptoms. I want to know what misinformation is circulating, because what you've been told is directly affecting whether you're getting the care you need. Now, here's what most men have been told about the symptoms I'm about to describe. They've been told it's age. They've been told their grandfather had the same thing and lived to 85. They've been told to drink more water, sleep more, stress less. And while those things are not wrong exactly, they are profoundly incomplete. Because what the clinical evidence actually shows is that each of these 3 symptoms maps directly onto a measurable biological mechanism. And each of those mechanisms has a window of intervention that most men are unknowingly closing by waiting. Let's go through them one by one. The first symptom is a change in urinary flow. Not pain, not blood, just a change. A stream that's weaker than it used to be. A sense that your bladder never quite empties. A hesitation at the start. Or waking up 2, 3, 4 times a night to urinate. Most men file this under getting older and move on. Here's what's wrong with that. A 2019 study out of Harvard Medical School, following 4,800 men over 60 across a period of 8 years, found that lower urinary tract symptoms, what clinicians refer to as LUTs, were present in over 72% of men who were later diagnosed with early-stage benign prostatic hyperplasia, or BPH. The key finding wasn't the diagnosis itself, it was the timeline. The men who presented within 12 months of symptom onset had a 64% higher rate of successful medical management compared to men who waited over 2 years. In plain language, the earlier you come in, the more options you have, and the more likely those options actually work. The mechanism is straightforward. As men age, the prostate gland, which sits directly beneath the bladder and surrounds the urethra, begins to enlarge under the influence of dihydrotestosterone, a metabolite of testosterone. This enlargement is gradual and, in its early stages, almost entirely silent except for these urinary changes. The bladder compensates by working harder. Over time, that compensation breaks down. The muscle wall thickens. Urgency increases. The window for conservative treatment narrows. I had a patient, a 68-year-old retired engineer, who came to me after 3 years of nocturia, waking up 3 times every night. He'd been told by 2 different people that this was just how men slept after 60. When we did his workup, his post-void residual volume, the amount of urine left in the bladder after urination, was over 200 milliliters. That is significant retained urine. His bladder wall had already begun to show the early signs of trabeculation, meaning structural remodeling from chronic overwork. We caught it. We managed it. But 3 years earlier, his options would have been considerably wider. That's the clinical reality of symptom number 1. A weak stream, incomplete emptying, or nighttime urination more than once is not aging. It is a signal. and the research shows clearly what happens when that signal is ignored. The second symptom is fatigue that does not respond to rest. Not tiredness after a long day, not the kind of fatigue that a good night's sleep fixes. I'm talking about a persistent, low-level depletion, a heaviness that's there when you wake up, that doesn't lift by noon, that makes physical effort feel disproportionately hard. Men describe it in my office as feeling flat. They often add, almost as an afterthought, that their drive is lower too. Their motivation, their libido, their general engagement with life. They've been told it's depression or stress or simply the consequence of being over 60. Here's what the clinical evidence shows. A landmark study from the University of Edinburgh, published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, followed 3,200 men between the ages of 40 and 79 over a 9-year period. The researchers found that persistently low energy, combined with reduced sexual interest, was the symptom cluster most specifically and reliably associated with clinically low testosterone, what we call hypogonadism. Critically, this combination was more predictive than either symptom alone. The study also found that men with this presentation who went undiagnosed and untreated for more than 18 months showed measurably accelerated decline in bone mineral density, lean muscle mass, and metabolic function. Let me be precise about the mechanism, because this is where the misinformation does the most damage. Testosterone does not simply govern libido. It governs cellular energy metabolism. It regulates red blood cell production through erythropoietin signaling. It maintains mitochondrial function in muscle tissue. When testosterone falls below the clinical threshold, which the data suggests happens in roughly 20 to 40% of men over 60, depending on the population studied, the result is not just a reduced interest in sex. It is a systemic reduction in the body's capacity to generate and sustain energy at a cellular level. The fatigue you feel is not in your head. It has a measurable physiological origin. What's wrong with the conventional advice here, sleep more, stress less, is not that it's harmful. It's that it treats a hormonal and metabolic signal as a lifestyle problem. And while lifestyle absolutely matters, it cannot fully compensate for a hormonal deficit that requires clinical evaluation. The men who come in early, who get their levels properly assessed, who receive an appropriate, evidence-based management plan, those men have substantially better outcomes across every relevant marker: energy, body composition, cognitive clarity, cardiovascular health. The third symptom is one that men are least likely to mention, and that is exactly why I'm going to spend the most time on it. It is a change in erectile function, not necessarily complete erectile dysfunction, but a change. A reduction in morning erections, an erection that's less firm than it used to be, a longer recovery time, an inconsistency that wasn't there 5 years ago. Men do not bring this up. They feel embarrassed, or they've decided it's an inevitable consequence of age and there's nothing to be done. Both of those responses, I want to tell you directly, are costing men their health. Here's what's wrong with the "it's just age" narrative. A 2018 meta-analysis published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine, drawing on data from over 11,000 men across 14 separate cohort studies, found that erectile dysfunction, even in its mild to moderate early forms, was independently associated with a twofold increase in risk for major cardiovascular events, including myocardial infarction and stroke in men over 50. The association held even after controlling for other cardiovascular risk factors: hypertension, diabetes, smoking, obesity. In plain language, changes in erectile function in men over 50 are not just a sexual health issue. They are a cardiovascular warning signal. The mechanism explains why. Erection is a vascular event. It depends on healthy endothelial function, the ability of the inner lining of blood vessels to dilate in response to nitric oxide signaling. The penile arteries are small, roughly 1 to 2 millimeters in diameter, and they are among the first vessels in the body to show the effects of endothelial dysfunction. This means that changes in erectile function often precede detectable cardiovascular disease by 3 to 5 years. The penis, from a vascular standpoint, is an early warning system. And most men are not receiving that warning because no one has told them what the symptom means. I had a patient, 62, moderately overweight, no diagnosed cardiovascular conditions, who came in, finally, after his wife encouraged him, reporting that he'd noticed a significant reduction in firmness over the preceding 18 months. He'd assumed it was stress. His workup revealed early endothelial dysfunction, a fasting glucose in the pre-diabetic range, and a lipid panel that warranted immediate intervention. We addressed each of those factors. His vascular health improved measurably over the following year. But the point is this: had he waited another 2 or 3 years, we might have been having a very different conversation after a cardiac event rather than before one. That is the clinical reality of symptom number 3. Now let me give you an evidence-based action plan, because information without direction doesn't serve you. Step 1. If you are experiencing any of the urinary changes I described, reduced flow, incomplete emptying, or waking more than once a night to urinate, schedule a urology appointment and ask specifically for a PSA test, a post-void residual measurement, and a prostate volume assessment. These are standard, non-invasive, and the research supports their use as a baseline workup. Do not wait for the symptom to get worse. Step 2. If you are experiencing persistent fatigue that does not resolve with rest, combined with reduced drive or motivation, ask your physician for a full hormonal panel: total testosterone, free testosterone, LH, FSH, and SHBG. These tests take a single blood draw. The data from the Edinburgh study I cited is clear that this symptom cluster requires clinical evaluation, not lifestyle adjustment alone. Step 3. If you have noticed any change in erectile function, do not dismiss it. Ask your physician for a cardiovascular risk assessment that includes fasting glucose, a full lipid panel, and blood pressure measurement. If you are not already seeing a urologist, ask for a referral. The meta-analysis I referenced shows unambiguously that early presentation leads to early intervention, and early intervention changes outcomes. Gentlemen, here is what I need you to hear. You haven't been failing. You haven't been weak. You've been working with incomplete information. Information that told you these symptoms were normal, that they were inevitable, that nothing could be done. The clinical evidence contradicts every one of those claims. These symptoms are signals. They have mechanisms. Those mechanisms have intervention windows, and every day you wait, that window narrows. Tell me one thing you believed about these symptoms that this video changed. I read every comment, and the answers you leave help me understand what information men over 50 are still not receiving. I'm Dr. Emily Carter. Early urological and vascular symptoms in men over 50 are not signs of aging. They are clinically actionable signals, and the research is unambiguous that acting on them early saves lives. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.